Hey, hope you're having a great day. So today I have for you vampire book recommendations. Now I've got some YA, I've got some rom-com, I've got some more adult, smuttier versions. I've got a little bit of everything in this round. So I hope you really enjoy and let's get right into it. First off, Vampire Academy to start us out. So, such a good story. This is a YA. This is one of my favorite book series of all time. I read it when I was in middle school, high school, and I reread it again last year. So I really enjoyed it as I was younger, and as an adult, I can also appreciate it, and I really enjoy it. It's one of my top favorite series of all time. So what happens? Vampires are not known to the world, but there are vampires who are the royals, who are called the Morai, I believe, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and then they are the Dampmirs. So they're pretty much half vampire, half human, but they have pretty much all the extra strengths, and they're just the brutes and the grunts, and pretty much the protectors of the Morai. So they all have to go to this vampire academy, and they all are kind of together, but like the vampires stay away, the Dampmirs train are the bodyguards, but then they get paired together. Well, something happens, and the main characters, Rose and Lisa, are somehow really bonded, and they leave the school for some things that happen. And they've pretty much been on the run for like this last year and a half. Well, the school finally catches up, takes them back, and this whole shebang kind of unravels. And it's a really, really good scene. It's got like some politics, they're 16, 17-year-olds, so within the academy, school age, there's some boy issues. It really is such a well-rounded book, and the plotline is so good because it always kind of keeps you guessing. You're not really sure what's going to happen. And then there's also the Strigoi. So the Strigoi are like the bad vampires that like will suck your blood dry kind of thing. And so they're always kind of battling against them, but they kind of have like a new stronghold coming together. And so they then start to battle them out in the later books. And I believe this is a 6 or 7 book series. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but so good. Highly suggest that. And yeah, definitely more for young adult, but I enjoyed it as much of an adult as well. So yeah. Next is the Vampire's Mail Order Bride. So this one I actually just recently read, and it is hilarious. I loved almost every second of this book. It's technically in a series, but they're all standalone, interconnected series, and it's all set in this one town called Nocturne Falls, Georgia, where it is fall 360, or not necessarily fall, but Halloween 365 days a year. And this is kind of like a hot spot for supernaturals. So even though they celebrate Halloween every day, it kind of lets loose the supernaturals to be able to kind of go out amongst themselves. They don't have to hide themselves so much as from humans. So the main character, she's in New York, and she works at this diner or restaurant, and her boss is kind of like the Italian mafia kind of thing, but she doesn't really think it's true. Well, one night she happened to forget something at the restaurant, so she goes back, it's early morning, and she witnesses him offing somebody. And so she had recorded the whole thing on the phone, and then they had kind of turned since she had kind of made a noise, and they knew it was her. And so she's like running from them on the streets, and she just happens to like dive into this random shop. And like the lady is there like, oh, hold on, I'll like take care of you or whatever. And it ends up being like a mail order bride service. And so she takes the top file and sees that it's in this Nocturne Falls, Georgia. And so she kind of takes it upon herself. She's just like, okay, I'm going to get myself out of this. I don't want to die because this Italian mafia boss is going to come after me. So she grabs all her things. She calls the lady who was supposed to be going down to Georgia to marry this guy. And she's just like, oh yeah, this match is not for you, yada, yada, yada. And then she's like, oh. And so she takes her place and kind of impersonates her to a certain degree. She's still herself, but just says her own name, or like is that person's name. And so she goes down there, and the male main character, he has been alone for a couple centuries. He is a vampire. He is not wanting to be in a relationship. There's been some issues in the past, but the grandma really wants some grandbabies, and she wants him to be married and settle down. So she took it upon himself to go ahead and order him the mail order bride. So he's like thinking, I'm going to get her in and out of here in a month and just be done with it. I tried and whatnot. And the grandma has like some leverage to keep him, from not doing anything. So the female main character comes down from New York, kind of shows up and just kind of rocks his entire world. And in the packet, she's supposed to have known he's a vampire, but she didn't realize at the time like what kind of mail order service it was. And so that is slowly kind of revealed, and it's such a cute story. I love the female main character. It's a super fun, it's a quick read. I will say it's very, very fast-paced relationship-wise. Like everything happens within days, which is not a bad thing. But just to forewarn you, that was one thing I'm like, is that realistic? But of course, It's a book. It's fantasy. It's not always supposed to be realistic, but it's actually a really good book. It's one of my, I will say, I think one of my top reads this year, and I really, really enjoyed this book. And again, it's a standalone, interconnected series. There's some others down the line, but this is the first in the series, and I really, really enjoyed it. My roommate is a vampire. So this is I would say, an epitome of a rom-com vampire. It is so cute. It is so fun. So the female main character, she is kind of like a struggling artist. She can't really find the job that she wants, so she's working like 2 or 3 different dead-end jobs just to kind of make bills, and she's just kind of struggling and having a hard time going through life. She happens to find a lead on Craigslist because they are in Chicago and for rent for $200, and she's just like, that can't be real. But she's like, oh my gosh, I just have to, it's so cheap, it would help her out so much to kind of pay off some of her student loans and things like that, and just kind of help her get back on track. So she goes and she meets this guy, and he's just so old school. Everything in the apartment is a mismatched of different decades, and she doesn't understand. And so she moves in just because she needs a place to stay, and she just kind of feels like it's the right fit. And he is actually a vampire. So slowly the story will unfold as she then finds it out. But he has been asleep for 100 years because something happened. And so he really got the roommate in order for somebody to kind of show him what the world is now. Because imagine, he doesn't understand what's happening. He doesn't understand morals have changed, how society has changed, what to do, what not to do, how to be looked upon, how to act in society. I mean, even just credit cards. And so that was his kind of thing. And they end up kind of falling in love. And it's super sweet. There's a little bit of spice. There's one spicy scene, and that's it. So it's not really a big spicy thing, but it's a fun rom-com, easy read, and I really, really enjoyed it, and I think you guys will too. Next is Eternal Rain. Now this is fantastic. This is by one of my favorite authors, Caroline Peckham and Susan Valente. And there's another book here that I'll talk about here in a minute, but this one particularly, Eternal Rain, so good. So I believe this is 7 or 8 books, and they're pretty hefty books. They're good. They're usually on Kindle Unlimited. So good. So World War III happened. All the humans kind of wastelanded everything and kind of killed off most of each other. So vampires then arose from the ground and kind of took over the world, and they now rule. And so all of the humans are pretty much put into pens, and they are kept there, and they're not kept in good conditions. They're all kind of struggling, and vampires rule, and in particular 4 main vampires are royalty in this sense. And so it's vampires meets Vikings, and it's actually super interesting. So it follows the main characters of 2 twins, and they've grown up in these realms, and is what they call where they keep all the humans now. They're struggling, and they're just trying to find a way. And there is something that's happening, once a year, the royals test all of their blood. Certain ages, they test their blood, and then if they do have that certain blood that they're looking for, they get to go all the way out to where the royals live, and then they are presented to them. And then if they are chosen, they pretty much get to live a life of grandeur and never have to go back to the human pens or anything like that. So these twins are no, I don't want to do that. I don't want this. And so they try to escape. One twin ends up escaping, the other does not. And it's just a wild, wild ride. There is not a whole lot of spice at the beginning, but as the series goes on, it does get a lot spicier. It's very interesting. It's more of a magic vampire of this is a curse, not just they were made into vampires. And it's very, very interesting. It's a really good read. It's super fun. It's a nice, long, dedicated series. So if you're looking for something to really kind of dive into, this is the series for you. And I really, really highly suggest it. Next is Allie Hazelwood's Bride. So Allie Hazelwood is known for her STEM rom-coms. This is her first, I think, true fantasy book, and I love it. I loved this book. So the female main character is a vampire. The male main character is a werewolf. So the female main character, with her being a vampire, in this world, everybody knows that supernaturals exist. And they kind of have a really uneasy truce between the humans, vampires, werewolves, and whatnot, other supernaturals. But something happens where their humans are kind of getting too big for their britches, and the vampires and werewolves are really nervous. And so they're scared something's going to happen. The humans are going to retaliate. And they could easily be overwhelmed just because humans there's so many of them compared to the supernaturals. So in order to kind of protect themselves, the vampires and werewolves come into a truce, and that's where the female main character comes in. She's kind of like the daughter of someone really high up in like the vampire coven. So she is made to marry the alpha of the werewolf pack and this like political alliance. And so that's kind of where the story begins, and it kind of comes down to also her friend, the female main character, her friend went missing, but somehow is connected to the alpha werewolf, and she kind of took it upon herself, as with marrying him, like, I'm gonna figure out where she went and what happened to her. So it really is an interesting story of like politics. It's got a really interesting plot line. It's got a little bit of like a murder mystery vibe, and it's actually really good. You wouldn't think all those things would come together, but she does it really, really well, and it kind of keeps you on your toes because you don't really know what's going to happen, and like this whole plot unfolds, and it's super, super interesting. And there is a little bit of spice. There is some werewolf stuff where I'm like, whoo, okay, it's a little steamy, and it's a little up there. So if you're a little unsure, don't really like the spice, you can skip those scenes, but there's really not that many in there for you to be like, oh, I'm not going to read this book because it's dark romance. That's not it whatsoever, but it's a really good read. Highly suggest it. It's just the one book, so it's quick and easy to get through. And the last is my ultimate favorite series in the entire world, Zodiac Academy. So this has vampire shifters. So this is about all different types of shifters. There's dragons, phoenixes, werewolves, vampire shifters. It is the best, most phenomenal book that you ever read. Like, if you liked ACOTAR, you're going to like Zodiac Academy. Zodiac Academy is my supreme of all supreme books. If you ever read any books, I suggest you read the Zodiac Academy series. Oh, so good. So it follows a set of twins. They grew up in the human world. All of a sudden, one day, and they pretty much like did not have a good life growing up in the human world. Some dude kind of comes in and is just like, hey, actually, you're Fae royalty. You have to come to the like other universe where the Fae live. And they're like, what? So they're like thrust into this world. They end up being the daughters of the royalty who were murdered like years and years ago, and they were like the lost princesses. And so they are thrust into this world, and they were told if they finish through this academy, because they're like 18 years old, if you go through this academy and you get it, you can then get your inheritance. And so far the world has been taken over, kind of like the counselors have been kind of ruling all over everything. And so they're kind of like a big, like, what? They thought they had been gone for so many years, and they're like a really big threat to them and their society. And so they just want the inheritance. They want nothing to do with it. But it's a really, really interesting story. I think there's 9 books. I'm pretty sure it's 9 books. Yes, yeah, there is, because there's like an 8.5, but the 9th book finally came out earlier this year. Oh, so good. But anyway, super, super good. All different types of shifters. It's such a beautiful world. Like, when you read this series, this is something that will not leave you ever. It is so, so good. I could talk about it for days and days and days, and it's so, 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 so good. Highly suggest it. Again, vampire shifters, but it's got all different types of shifters. Like, this is the ultimate fantasy book series. It's long. It is heartbreaking, but since all the books are out now, you don't have to be ending on a cliffhanger, and it is good. Highly suggest it. And that's it. Those are my 6 book vampire recommendations. I really hope you like it. And if you guys have any other recommendations or other books that you think should make it to my list, go ahead and add it down in the comments, and I will talk to you guys next time, and I'll see you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.